This is the Scrite UI. It consists of three main parts. There's the structure canvas where you can create scenes. There's a timeline where you drag and drop scenes from the canvas to this area here so that you can sequence them in your story. And then this is the editor where you're going to end up typing the content of your scenes. So the three main areas in the UI. All right, let's go ahead and create our very first scene in the screenplay. So to create a scene, I have to click on the add scene button and then select from any of the colors that show up in this menu here. So I can select blue, and then I'll tap on one of the empty areas in the canvas, and a scene block gets created right under the mouse. And I can give some title to the scene. This title need not be it need not be one line. You can write several lines of text. This actually wraps around so that you can keep typing a description of the scene that you want to create. So the text that you write here doesn't actually show up in your screenplay. This is mostly for your reference so that you get a bird's eye view of the scenes that you're creating, right? So this is how you'd go about creating a scene in your screenplay. You notice this button here, that's the menu for altering certain things about the scene, or if you want to delete the scene altogether, right? So you can change the color of the scene block at any point to any other color that you want. The reason why we feel that colors are very important when you capture the structure of your screenplay is it's possible that your screenplay, your story has 4 tracks or 5 tracks, right? And you probably want to give different colors to different tracks so that when you zoom out, you'll be able to see the different tracks visually placed in your structure canvas. Now this canvas is a kind of an open concept, right? We thought of doing things like we wanted one of the axes to be the time of your story, the other axis to be, let's say, the characters in your story. But then we thought, it's not necessary that all screenplays are character versus time stories. It could be anything. So we've just kept it as a graph. You can place your scene blocks anywhere you want in this graph. So let's go ahead and add another scene here. So I'm going to this time select purple, and I'll say another scene, right? And then let's say we'll add another scene just for kicks and say yet another scene, right? So you'll notice that none of these scenes are currently in the timeline, which means they don't show up in your screenplay, in your final screenplay yet. You just have scenes that act as raw materials, for your story. They are not actually in your story yet. All right, let's go ahead and create some content for the scenes that we've just created. So I'm going to so anytime I select any of the blocks in my structure canvas, the content editor on the right hand side actually shows the content of that particular scene. So you'll notice that the color keeps changing here, right? When I select different blocks in the structure editor. So I'm going to go here and let's say this is external, this is the scene heading, some street and day, right? So here we type the action of our scene, and let's say in our scene we have action, character, dialogue from the character, parenthetical, or a shot and transition and so on. So that's what our scene content would comprise of. So I have some action text here, and let's say in our scene we have 2 characters speaking to each other. So I can then switch into character paragraph style either by clicking on this button here, or I can just say tab and then start typing and say guy, and then you'll notice that it immediately switches into dialogue paragraph style. He says something, and then say he's talking to a girl and he said she says something, and then we come back to the guy, he says something else, girl, she says something else, right? And then we come back to action, right? So you can use the shortcuts command 1 on command 1, command 2, command 3, command 4, 5, 6 on Mac, or it is control 1, control 2, control 3, 4, 5, 6 on Windows, right? So I can switch between various paragraph styles. So if I want to, let's say, in a lot of scenes they have transitions. You want to transition from one to another. So the transition would be something like a flash cut to, or something like that, right? And then you can type some more action here. So you'll notice that as you type and associate various paragraph styles, the content actually shows up in the format that a typical screenplay would use. Okay, so we can go ahead and create text for different scenes in my structure. But what I want to now do next is actually move on and not really complete a story, but show you how to use the application. So I want these 3 scenes to show up in my final screenplay. So the way I would insert this into my screenplay is, you'll notice that there is this icon on the bottom right of these blocks. When you hover over it, it actually becomes slightly bigger. You can click on that and drag the scene block to this area down below, right? And that's when your scene block actually becomes a part of your screenplay. And then after the scene, let's say I want this scene to show up, so I'll drag and drop this one. And then let's say I want this scene to show up, and I'll drag and drop this one. And you'll notice that as I'm dragging and dropping scenes onto my timeline here, these arrows come in the canvas, kind of conveying the flow of my story. So if I click on any of these blocks here, you'll now notice that the screenplay editor now transforms into a flow of scene blocks, right? So you get one scene block after another scene block after another scene. You can just scroll between various scene blocks. And now I can go ahead and type my scene here, right? Type some action, dialogues, etc., right? And then if you notice that now when I go back and click on this, it's showing only this particular scene. But when I click here, it's showing the same scene in the context of my entire screenplay. Let's say after the scene, after this yet another scene, let's say I want to go back to the opening scene, vantage point style, right? So in vantage point, this one opening scene where the bomb blast happens, and then they kind of show the same scene from different characters' perspective. So there's this very good chance that you're going to revisit the same scene over and over again in your screenplay. So now if you look at this, if in your final screenplay, the same scene shows up in both the places. So I could type something is happening here, and you'll notice that if I scroll down, it's the same scene, so the same text kind of shows up here as well, right? So this way you'll be able to create scenes, put them together into a sequence, and kind of make a screenplay out of various scenes that you create for your film. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. See, if you are a seasoned screenplay writer, you'll find that all of this is a bit too much. You don't want to really create blocks here, drag and drop them. You just want to create one scene after another scene after another scene after another scene, because you've been doing this for a long time, and you really don't need all this user interface. So if you're that kind of person, then you start fresh, and you can click this block here. It will straight away create a scene for you, insert it in the structure and also in the timeline, and you can go ahead and type stuff here, right? And at any point of time, let's say you want to create one more scene, you can simply click on the plus icon here, and it will create a new scene. And notice that it is already dragged and dropped it into the timeline. And like this, you can go on creating a new scene and a new scene and a new scene and a new scene. And this way you can go on creating scenes. And at some point in your writing, you want to kind of take a bird's eye view of your flow. You can just zoom out and look at this entire scene. And let's say you want to place it differently, right? And so that you'll be able to, let's say, visualize the shape of your story, right? I want to show you something really cool that you can do with Scrite. Let's say after you write your screenplay, you want to kind of see what happens if I change the flow of my story, right? What happens if I take this block and move it out here? Can you see the shape of my story changed, right? This would be a completely different story, right? So you'll be able to, that's the reason we have scene blocks in the structure canvas and the timeline as a separate thing, so that you can move your blocks back and forth and create different variations of your story, and then you can figure out how each variation looks like, right? So I want to very quickly walk you through these buttons out here. These two buttons, I think I'll show you when I show an existing screenplay. They make sense when you see it like that. This one allows you to create breaks in your screenplay, right? For example, a lot of screenplays, they follow the 3-act structure. So let's say you want to create an act break, so you can create an act break. Or let's say you want to create an interval break. In your screenplay, you want to be very clear about when the interval shows up, so you can create an interval break, right? At any point of time, you can move the breaks back and forth. Now I want to show you how you can write in different languages using Scrite. So let's say I add a scene here in my block, and I want to now type the one-liner of my scene in let's say Kannada. So I can go to this language menu here. This is Scrite supports transliteration, it's not translation. So I can go and click on this language menu here, and I can select Kannada. So from now on, everything I type will be transliterated into Kannada, right? So I can go here and say Kannada, and the moment I hit spacebar, it's going to convert the just completed word into Kannada, right? Or I could go and select Hindi, and from then on, it will convert the last written word into Hindi, right? So this, and it's the same logic anywhere, right? I can go here and type, let's say, or I can use the shortcut key, which is Alt E, Alt P, etc., to change from one language to another. So I'm going to just go here and say Alt E, so it's going to switch into English, and I'll say 2 people are speaking to each other, right? I'll say North Indian guy, and then the North Indian guy is going to probably speak in Hindi, so he'll say right. And then let's say we have a South Indian guy, so I'm going to go back to English and say South Indian guy, and now the South Indian guy is probably from Bangalore. Let's say he's going to speak in Kannada. Ninna hesaru yenu, right? So this way I can type my screenplay in various Indian languages that support all of these languages, right? A lot of times we don't write screenplays that uses all of these languages, right? So what we want to probably do is, let's say, have a screenplay where we're maybe using just English and Kannada. We're switching between English and Kannada. So I can go to the settings panel here and go to this place that says active languages, and I can select English and let's say Kannada, and that's it. So from this point onwards, what happens is I can hit the F10 key to switch between the 2 active languages from my settings configuration, right? So I'm switching between Kannada and English. So I can just hit the F10 key and switch between the 2 languages that I have selected. So this is the way I would go about writing in Indian languages. So this transliteration is baked in right into this app thanks to a open source library called as PH Translator. Okay, so now I want to show you what a typical screenplay project would look like, right? So this is a screenplay that I've written, and this is not probably among the best screenplays you'll read, but it will help demonstrate the ideas in Scrite. So I have, if I zoom out here, so let's make some space. I'm going to compress this part. This is going to look really bad, but that's okay. So I'm going to come back here, and if you notice, I have 3 major tracks going on in this in my story. So there is this orange track that belongs to 2 characters in my story, Nagi and Manja, and then there is the purple track which belongs to two other characters called Rakesh and Ramya, and then there's the blue track, which which belongs to another character in my story called Maruti, right? So what happens here is this. So I have something, we start with the Nagi thread, right? And then after that we show something else that happens with Nagi and Manja. And then around the same time that Nagi is kind of leaving from his house, there's a second thread that starts, which is with Rakesh, and then he also comes out. And by the time Nagi and Manja have actually left their house, that's when Rakesh would have left his house as well. Just about the same time, Maruti and family, they're enjoying an ice cream in an ice cream shop, and then things goes on, right? So in my visual capture of my story in the structure, the x-axis is my timeline. This is where things are happening between various characters in my screenplay. And as the story progresses, I'm able to see how the story flows between these characters, right? So I can go here and scroll through the entire screenplay and read it from beginning to end, right? And notice that I'm making good use of Kannada fonts throughout the screenplay. So this is what a typical screenplay project would look like, right? And they'll be much bigger than this, but this is what a typical screenplay project would look like. We're trying to work with some of the known film directors in Karnataka. We want to take their screenplays and make their screenplays available in Scrite format, so that you're able to study the structure, timeline of the screenplays and actually change the sequence of story and see if it would have been a different story, and you'll be able to understand why these filmmakers composed their screenplay the way they composed it. Okay, so one of the things that I want to highlight here is that the app ensures that these three views are kind of in sync, so that you don't lose track of the story, of the flow in your story. Let's say I scroll to some part of the timeline and I'm going to select a particular block here. It actually reveals where in my flow this particular scene exists, and then it also highlights the same scene inside the editor as well. Now notice that if I click on another block here, the actively selected block in my timeline and structure also changes, right? So you'll never lose track or context of what where you are in the story. All right, so now I want to quickly show you the export functionality. So you see this menu here called export. So when I click on that, I get a bunch of options. These are all the various formats in which I can export the screenplays written in Scrite. So I can export my screenplay to Adobe PDF or to Final Draft. I can export to HTML or to a simple text file. So let's just start with PDF export. So I'm going to go here and select Adobe PDF, and let's say I want to export it to a PDF file. So I'll say save. It actually opens the folder where the PDF export is saved. So I can then go ahead and open this file. So let me put it inside the view here so that you're able to see the PDF file. And see, this is the title page, and then you'll notice that this whole thing is exported, right? And just like you would expect a typical PDF export from a screenplay application to behave, you have the page numbers on the top right, the title here, and there's actually a subtitle here, but my screenplay has no subtitle. And then there is the author, the version number, and the email ID, right? You can turn all of these off if you want, but this is the default. And you'll notice that the character names are shown in purple. I'll just show you in a bit how you can alter the paragraph styles. So let's close this. I'm going to go back to my application. So I can launch the settings dialog box here, and I'll notice that there's a whole bunch of knobs that are provided to me. So I can configure the title page, provide a title, subtitle, author, email ID, and so on. I can also configure the stuff that should show up in the header and footer of my PDF export. So let's say for some reason I want, let's say, date or date time, right, to show up in the top center. And there are these segments of format configuration panels. So this is the on-screen format for the heading, action, character, dialogue, parenthetical, short, and transition. These are what the app is going to refer to when it wants to show your screenplay on the screen. When you want to actually print it to a PDF file, it actually refers to the print format section. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and change the color of the character names in my print export to red. Let's say somewhere here, okay, like make them dangerous or something. And all the dialogues are going to be, let's say, in a little bit of blue color, right? Nobody would actually do this, but I just want to show you that these configurations are possible. So I'm going to close this, and now I'll say, and you notice that nothing has changed in the on-screen representation of your screenplay. So now when I go to export and export it to PDF file, the replaced PDF is going to contain all of my stuff in the new colors, right? And you'll notice that the header now has date, right? Because that's what I wanted, a date, right? Okay, so this is a PDF export. I could of course export it to Final Draft, or I could export it to HTML. So the HTML export is interesting because when I export it into HTML, it retains the colors of my scenes. So this way, if you want to upload your screenplay to a website somewhere, you'll be able to use it. You'll notice that the action elements and so on, they don't actually use the Courier font here, and that's because the Screenplay app makes use of Courier Prime, which is not available by default. You can download and install them from Google Fonts. I can also export it to text file, in which case I will not get all the colors and blink. It's just going to be a simple text file, but it's going to have the formatting of a screenplay. So sometimes you might want to import a screenplay that's already written in another app, Final Draft for example, and then import it into Scrite and then further edit it here because maybe you like the canvas feature, the structure feature, or the timeline feature, I don't know, or maybe you just want to use an open source app. So I can go ahead and import a screenplay from Final Draft or HTML formats, right? So let me show you the Final Draft imports. I click on Final Draft and it allows me to select a file in FDX format, and then I'll say open. It's just simply going to parse the entire FDX file and then import that into my screenplay here, into my Scrite project here. And you'll notice that the structure is not really indicative of the flow of the story. It just creates one block here, and then cycles through some basic colors. You will then have to go ahead and place the various scenes in your story into a shape that makes sense to you. I want to quickly show you two things that I talked about before, which is these plus and minus signs. You notice that this block is wider than the other blocks that show up in the timeline, and that's because this is a fairly long scene, right? So the sizes of these blocks give you an indication of how big my scene is, right? So I can go ahead and expand this so that I get a fairly wide timeline view, or I can just compress it so that I'll just get a bird's eye view of the entire timeline, right? So this is very useful if you want to get a sense of which scene is bigger than which, so that you get relative sizes of scenes relative to each other. Alright, so the last thing that I want to talk about, last but one thing that I want to talk about in this app is this tool button called as reports. We only have just 2 reports right now, but over a period of time we'll have more reports here as well. So let's say I want a character report, and in this character report I want to extract information about this character called Nagi, right? So I can just select on Nagi and then say I want all the dialogues of Nagi, all the scenes in which Nagi's dialogue show up, and also I want any notes that I have written about Nagi to show up in my character report. So now we can go ahead and say generate, and it's going to generate this character report for me as a PDF file, where only stuff related to the character Nagi is pulled out from the screenplay into a simple PDF file. So this would be useful to, if you want to just give a printout of this to the actor who's going to play Nagi, so that he can by heart his lines simply by looking at this particular file, right? So he knows how many dialogues he has, how many times he's seen, in which of the scenes that he's going to speak, and all of that, right? Similarly, there's something called as the location report. So I can click on location report and say generate. It's going to then generate a location report for the entire screenplay. So it says how many scenes are there in what all locations. So this would help in production planning, right? So that, let's say I want to film all the living room in the villa scenes together, right? How many day scenes are there, how many night scenes are there, and so on. So this would also help when you're doing production planning. So similarly, we're going to be having other reports as well. One of the reports that we want to extract is, let's say, a subtitle report, so that you can give a subtitle file to the person who's going to create subtitles for your film, so that he can refer to the dialogues from your screenplay while writing the subtitles. Finally, I want to talk about a feature called Notebook. This is where I would be able to capture notes about my screenplay, my project. So there are many tabs in my notebook, right? So the first tab is the story tab. This is where I can store notes related to my entire story. Maybe I want to capture, key global things about my story, right? What's the main arc of the story and whatever, right? So to create a note, I can click on this icon here, and I can create a note, and each note has a heading, and I can type some contents here. And in addition to having capturing notes against the entire story, for every scene I'll be able to capture notes particular, specific to that scene. Maybe for this scene I want to capture some things that I want to share with with respect to the lighting of for the scene, or the kind of sound that I want for the scene, and so on. And in addition to per scene notes, and this tab changes depending on which is the active scene in my Scrite project. And then I can have one tab for every character in my screenplay, where I can capture things like what's the dramatic need of this character, and so on. If I want to add more tabs for other characters, I can click on that icon here. We probably need a better icon there, but I can click on that icon there, and then select another character from my screenplay, and I create a brand new tab for him, where I can create notes. And these notes can be bundled into the character report that you generate for different characters. So that's it. This is Scrite. We would love it if you use and give us feedback. To give us feedback, it's very simple. You click on this about box here, and then click on the feedback button. It will take you to a Google Forms page, where you can give us feedback about Scrite, and let us know what you like, what you don't like, and what you want us to improve. Scrite is an open source project. Eventually we're going to have lots of developers contributing code to this. If you want to participate in the software development aspect of it, reach out to us, and we'll fill you in on the details, and then you'll be able to get started soon. Thanks for watching this video.